continuing series today called Failing Forward. And I was going to say, usually I say something like, hey, you're here and you're here for a reason. I feel like God brought you here. And then I was going to introduce the subject and say, we're talking about failure. So I didn't want to insult you by saying, I think God brought you here for this reason. But I do actually think God brings every single person sitting here for a reason. And we are talking about failure. Because we've kind of established the idea that you're going to fail. You're going to fail in your life. You're going to fail. You're not going to be able to say from this day forward, I'm not going to do that. You're going to fail in big things. You're going to fail in little things. You're just going to have to deal with this for the rest of your life. So we're talking about what kind of a relationship we should have with failure. And today we're going to talk about the most dangerous aspect of failure, the worst possible thing that failure can do to you. The end of the road, so to speak, that failure would threaten to take you to, that you really don't want to go to. So to get there, you've probably heard, you probably know that smell and memory are connected. Have you heard this before, that your smell and your memory are very closely linked? Out of all of the senses that you have, for some reason, your sense of smell and your memory work closely together. I read about it, something about your olfactory bulb and your hippocampus. I don't know, I got lost in all that. And even as I was reading the articles, they're like, well, this is kind of hard to understand. I'm like, yeah, good point. I don't understand anything you're writing right now. But I did read some really cool stuff. One of the things, they did this experiment, and they took two groups, and they said, two groups of older people. So you can define that for yourself, whatever older means. And they split them into two, and they put diffusers in the room while they slept. And in the one group, they put a bunch of different scents, like every night, like rose or orange or eucalyptus or lavender and all these different scents. And then the other group, they just put water. And they did that for 6 months. They just kept having scent in the one group's room and nothing in the other. And what they found after 6 months, that the group with the scent in their room while they slept had a 226% improvement in their memory and cognitive ability. They were testing these things, 226%. And all they did was sleep with different smells in the room. I thought, that's crazy. And if that's real, you have my permission to get on Amazon right now and ignore me and buy a diffuser, because that seems like magic to me. That is crazy. But the connection between smell and memory is very strong. I also had a professor in college. He was organic chemistry class. If you've ever been in organic chemistry class, you know that it is the worst class in all of the classes that you can possibly take. And we were all struggling. Professor had us come in, and he was teaching us study tricks. Didn't help. But he said that one of the things you can do is have a mint in your mouth while you're studying, and then have the same kind of mint in your mouth while you're taking the test. And again, it's supposed to help this connection between your sense of smell and your memory. Now, my guess is that you don't need a scientist or a professor to tell you that smell and memories have connections, because you've probably had it happen where you smelled something and immediately it triggered a memory for you. And it's usually really powerful too. So for me, I have a bunch of different things. A turkey cooking, having a stroke, everyone. A turkey cooking in the oven. For me, that takes me back to Christmas morning when I was little, just opening my eyes. My mom always had a turkey cooking in the oven, and it just takes me right back. I can't wait to get my presents the moment I smell a turkey. If I smell Play-Doh, I am taken back to first grade immediately. Play-Doh just makes me feel like I lost my glue stick or something, like I got to go do something there. I have a weird one. Cigarette smoke takes me back to, you'll have to be older to remember this, when Pizza Hut had a smoking section. Do you guys remember when Pizza Hut? Gen Z, listen, the 80s were wild times. That half the room was smoking and half the room wasn't, and there was a magical barrier that kept smoke on one side. But I have these memories of Pizza Hut smelling like cigarette smoke. So if you smoke around me, I'm going to want a personal pan pizza just automatically. It's just going to be one of the things that it happens. And that's the thing about it, right? Because those smells, they don't just trigger a memory. They also trigger the feeling, right? It's really powerful connection that's in there. And it works and it's fun when the memories are good. But this can also work with with bad memories, this can also work with painful things. And some of you, maybe in this room, you have smells that make you almost physically sick because it takes you back to a time that you really don't want to remember. Now, I don't have anything quite at that level. I do have a smell that reminds me vividly of failure. It smells like failure to me. And it's weird as well. It's chlorine, like a swimming pool. When I smell like chlorine smell or a swimming pool smell, it takes me back to my senior year, high school basketball district finals, where we lost in double overtime on a last-second three-pointer. I was standing right under the hoop. The ball went through. It landed right here, and it was to Loudonville, which is the worst school ever. And I'm sorry, not actually. Their fans rushed. It was awful. And the reason chlorine triggers that is, for some reason, the high school where we would play the district finals smelled really strong like a swimming pool. I don't know if they had a swimming pool somewhere, but it smelled like chlorine every time we went in there. So when I smell chlorine, I feel like a failure, which is interesting because, like, whenever you're at a pool, sometimes that is the place where you feel like a failure the most, right? You're about to take your shirt off, like, I double feel like a failure every time I'm at a swimming pool. That's my life. So smell and memory, man, there's a strong, strong, strong connection. So we're going to look at a story in the life of a guy named Peter today. I want you to keep in mind this connection of smell and memory as we look at his story. So Peter, if you don't know who Peter is, he's one of Jesus' closest disciples. So Jesus had 12 disciples, and then he had 3 who were like his inner circle. Peter was one of those. Peter would probably argue, if you asked Peter, he'd probably argue that he was Jesus' closest friend. Him and John would have to argue about it, but I bet Peter would say, I am the closest person to Jesus while Jesus was on the earth. He absolutely loved Peter, or Jesus loved Peter, Peter loved Jesus. They were tight. And that's part of what made Peter's failure so bad. So you probably heard, if you grew up in church, that Peter betrayed Jesus. And it was the night Jesus was arrested. So Jesus gets arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember, Peter, at first, he gets real bold, and he pulls out a sword, and he tries to cut somebody's head off, but he misses and cuts their ear off. Bad aim. And then Jesus is like, stop all that, and he puts the guy's ear back on, and it's like, okay. And so Jesus gets taken away. And Peter follows from a distance. And I'm not sure Peter knew what Peter was doing, but he's kind of tailing. And Jesus gets taken to the high priest's house, and Peter ends up in like the courtyard outside of this house. And that is the location of Peter's greatest failure. And I want to read part of that to you here. It's John 18, starting verse 17. The woman asked Peter, "You're not one of that man's disciples, are you?" "No," he said, "I'm not." Because it was cold, the household servants and the guards made a charcoal fire. They stood around it, warming themselves, and Peter stood with them, warming himself. So it's this charcoal fire that Peter stands around with these people, where his greatest failure of his life takes place. And it's really interesting, the word charcoal fire in the original Greek, which this was written in, is the word anthrakia. Anthrakia. Charcoal fire, a specific kind of fire. And it's around this fire that Peter denies even knowing Jesus 3 different times. And if you look at all the gospel accounts and kind of piece them together, you can get a really clear picture of how this goes down. So he gets asked, and he says he doesn't even know him. He doesn't just say, I don't follow him. He's like, I don't even know them. And then, like it almost says like a little girl asks him the same question, hey, are you one of his followers? And one of the Gospels records that Peter cusses. He cusses to emphasize how much. And it basically something along the lines of like, I'll be damned if I know who that is, which is ironic because that's actually the opposite of the truth in multiple different ways. And then one of the gospel records the last time, and this is the one that will blow you away a little bit. So he's standing out in the courtyard, they're warming themselves by this fire, and he gets asked again. And somehow, like through a window or an open door, as soon as Peter's like, I don't even know that guy, him and Jesus lock eyes. And Jesus just looks at him right in the moment of his worst failure. And Matthew records that in that moment, Peter gets up and he runs away and he cries bitterly. It's when the failure, like he has the realization, of just how bad he failed in that moment, that he denied even knowing his best friend in his worst moments. He failed. He failed Jesus. He failed Jesus when Jesus needed him the most. This is the worst thing Peter had ever done. Have you ever failed so bad that like once you had the realization that you did it, which is weird because like Peter denied Jesus 3 times, but it didn't click until he locked eyes with Jesus. You know that moment where you kind of have that, you can almost say like you sober up a little bit and you realize what you did and you realize like this just changed my life. Like I just made a decision, I just did a thing that's actually going to change my life. That's where Peter's at. Now maybe you haven't had anything quite to that level. Maybe your failures are little. Maybe you have a smaller failure that you just keep doing over and over and over again. So you fail and you fail and you fail and you fail. And instead of some big life-altering decision, it's more of a, you start to notice that it is changing the trajectory of your life as you continue that little failure over and over and over again. So for Peter, it's all at once. 3 denials, worst failure he's ever had. And it sends him into a tailspin. And here's how bad it is. So that's the moment that Peter he goes one way and Jesus goes another. So you know the story. Jesus gets taken away and Jesus is crucified. He's hung on a cross. The Romans brutally kill him. And they put him in a tomb. It's kind of rushed. They get him into the tomb quick. They seal it up. And he's in this tomb for 3 days. Jesus is in this tomb. Because most people, you don't have to clarify how long they were in the tomb. Just, I know it's weird that you have to clarify he was there for 3 days because he didn't stay in the tomb. Now, we believe that Jesus came back to life. And I know that's kind of like if you're coming in and you're like new to the whole Christian thing, you're like, okay, so like, I get you guys have some faith stuff, but like you actually believe that Jesus came back to life? Yes, like for real. Now, here's my logic. If you believe that Jesus is God, right? If we believe that this, that we call it, in Christmas, we're going to celebrate the incarnation. That's God becoming man. That's God coming down. If you really believe that Jesus is God, I just want to propose to you that it's actually more surprising that they killed him than that he came back to life. Like, if he's God, I'm a little shocked they were able to pull that off. Like, it's not surprising at all that he bounced back out of that grave. I feel he's the source of life. This is like trying to make water not wet. I don't know how you could possibly make that permanent. So we believe that he came back to life. So as the story goes, the 3rd day, there's some women who want to come to Jesus' tomb, and they want to properly prepare his body for burial because the first time it was a little hasty. They didn't really do it quite right. So they're coming to try and do the right thing with Jesus' body. And when they get there, the tomb is empty. It's empty, it's empty, it's empty. And there's an angel sitting there. So you got all these miracles happening at once. Empty tomb, now there's an angel, and this angel starts talking to them. And this angel says something that's curious. Says something a little strange here. And I want to show it to you in Mark 16:7. Angel says this, "But go tell his disciples and Peter. He's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Did you see the strange part? Now, if you're reading this for the first time, you're like, okay, so an angel's speaking, that's strange. The angel's telling them that a dead guy is now alive and he's going to meet them in this city. All of it's strange, Adam. I get you. It is all strange. But that first part's the part that I get hung up on. Because the angel specifically says, hey, tell his disciples and Peter. That's strange. Peter is a disciple. Peter is one of his closest disciples. Peter would argue he's the closest disciple. Why did the angel clarify disciples and Peter? Well, it appears that the angel knew. The angel knew something happened to Peter in these 3 days that Jesus had been in the tomb. Peter's failure had gotten so deep inside of him, it had gotten all the way to the core, all the way to his bones, that he didn't even consider himself a disciple anymore. Peter had decided that his failure was at an identity level. He didn't think I failed. Peter was thinking, I am a failure. He made his failure final in his head, and he allowed this failure to shift everything he thought about himself. So the angel knew. If the angel would have just said, hey, go tell the disciples, and the ladies go back and say, hey, the angel told us to tell the disciples this, that Peter would have been like, that message isn't for me. You can tell the other guys, but I'm not that anymore. That's not who I am. Because he allowed that failure to get that deep inside of him that it affected his identity. And this is what I want to warn you about when it comes to failure in your life. I believe this is one of the deepest dangers of your failures in your life. That failure, the kind of failure that can threaten your identity. The kind of failure that can get all the way inside of you. To where you don't just say, I failed, you say, I am a failure. Where you allow this thing that you did, this thing that happened, to not just be something, but you allow it to become a part of you. And it shatters some of what you thought about you. And you start to incorporate the failure into your identity and how you think about you. That is the most dangerous thing that failure can do in your life, is get inside your identity. So Peter, in our language that we use today, evidently, he would say that he no longer identifies as a disciple. He's out on that now. He is identifying on the outside rather than on the inside of people who follow Jesus, based off of his failure. And that's an important thing to remember. He's having an identity crisis because of failure. Now, that's where he's at, and you can tell the angels like angling toward this, like, hey, tell the disciples and Pete, because Pete don't think he's a disciple anymore, so go tell Pete too. Now, that's where he's at. Now, this storyline kind of picks back up in John chapter 21, starting in verse 3. This is what happens. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. We'll come too, they all said, so they all went to the boat, and they caught nothing all night. We'll come back to that second part here in a minute, but I want to zoom in on this I'm going fishing part. Now, when you hear somebody say, I'm going fishing, that just sounds like a nice little thing that they're going to do for an afternoon, and maybe Peter needs that, right? He's had a stressful couple of days. He just needs to go chill, hang out in a boat and fish for a while. Maybe he can heal up or something. But I want you to know that like when Peter says that, it's a little different. So, for example, if I said the sentence, like say I was talking to my wife and I said, hey, I'm going to go play basketball, I would mean the driveway. Right? I'm going to go shoot hoops in the driveway, or maybe I'm going to go to a park somewhere. If I say I'm going to go play basketball, that's the level that I would mean it. But do you remember in the early 90s when Michael Jordan retired for the first time? Do you remember that? It was really dumb. He was the best basketball player in the world, and then he went and played baseball. You're the best at something, and you're like, I'm going to go do something else. Makes no sense whatsoever. But he took this little hiatus, and he played baseball, and he actually wasn't very good. And then do you remember that he held a press conference, and he said the sentence, I'm going to play basketball. Now, when Jordan said that, no reporter raised their hand and was like, do you mean like you're going to go shoot in the driveway, right? Nobody thought that's what he meant, right? Everybody knew that Jordan was like, I'm going back to that life. I'm going to do that. This is who I am again. I'm putting on the Bulls jersey. This is me. So when Peter says, I'm going fishing, he's not talking about it like me saying I'm going to play basketball. He's saying it like Jordan. He's not saying, I'm going to go try and catch some fish. He's saying, I'm going back to that life. This is an identity level statement. Fishing is not a hobby for Peter. Fishing is a life. Now, if you don't know, it's important that we rewind to when Jesus called Peter for the first time to be a disciple. So if you don't know this, Jesus actually hunted down the people that followed him. He called them to follow them. So Peter's story is kind of crazy, and it's where they're out fishing all night and they caught nothing, which is very similar to the verse we just read. They're out fishing and they catch nothing, and Jesus tells them to put their net on the other side of the boat, which is wild because it's not like the fish weren't here and they are here, right? So this is a crazy thing. And they do it, and the boat just gets pulled almost underwater because of the amount of fish. And Peter has this realization, this guy, Jesus, is something. And Jesus tells Peter a very famous thing. He says, hey, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. I'm going to make you fishers of people. You're not going to fish for fish anymore. You're going to fish for people. Follow me. And this is Peter's calling, and that's huge. This is Jesus on an identity level changing something about Peter. Hey, Peter, you're not a fisherman anymore. You are a disciple. You're not fishing anymore. You're following me. Like that's what Jesus just did to Peter. Identity level shift. And Peter, because of his failure, is saying, I guess I'm not that. I'm going back to this. Because I failed over here, I'm done with that identity, and I'm going back to this one. This is why your identity, the way you think about you, is so important, because you make decisions based off of who you believe yourself to be. And for 3 years, Peter saw himself as a disciple of Jesus, saw himself as a follower of Jesus, and he was making decisions out of that identity. But the moment it cracked, the moment he failed and he was like, I don't think I'm that anymore, he immediately starts making decisions out of a different identity. He went back to the old one. I guess I'm going fishing now. He stopped doing because he stopped identifying. So important. So let me ask you, Peter's basically saying, I'm a fisherman. Is he? Is he right? John 21:3, if he's saying, I am a fisherman, is he right? How you answer this tells a lot about how you think identity is formed. It's an important question. How does one form an identity? How does one come to believe these things about themselves? So, that's what happened. Pete's like, I'm a fisherman again. And you saw in the story that they caught nothing all night. Again, perfect parallel to the night that he was called by Jesus to become a follower. Now, here's how the story goes. So they're out there. Now, think about this. A couple days previous, Peter just denied Jesus 3 times. It was his biggest failure of his life. And he's like, I guess I'm not a follower of Jesus anymore. So he goes back to fishing. And his first night in his old identity, he catches nothing. Poor Peter, right? He's got to feel like a failure all the way around. So they're exhausted. They'd been fishing all night, didn't catch anything. Same old story. But here's the crazy part. They're about 100 yards offshore. Imagine a football field. They're way out there. And they hear a voice from shore saying, hey, throw your net on the other side. Now, can you imagine being in that boat? You're tired, you're exhausted. You hear that? Throw your net on the other side. What would happen inside of you? Now, they don't immediately think Jesus. And I know you're like, how? Come on, this is like a perfect parallel to the call. How are they missing it? Keep in mind, a couple days previous, they watched Jesus be brutally murdered. Like, they're not thinking back, you wouldn't either, right? Like, if you watch somebody die, you're not thinking, oh, that's the dead guy. Like, you're not going to think that. That's not going to be your instinct. So give them some credit here. But for some reason, they listen. Something happened enough inside of them, they're like, whatever. And they take the nets out of the one side, and they throw it on the other, and boom, the boat gets pulled. And it's actually recorded, John records there are 153 fish, very specific. I like that he was like, this is the exact number. It wasn't like 150-ish, 153. Exactly. Numbers matter. Now, when the fish hit the net, one of the disciples goes, it's him. Can you imagine that realization? It's him, it's Jesus. And so try to imagine with me what happened inside of Peter in that moment. There's a flare of hope, right? There's a flare of excitement. There's a flare of oh my gosh, this is so awesome. And then immediately followed by guilt and shame, right? You ever had that happen where you have an excitement that is just gobbled up by guilt and shame and it just beats it back down? So Peter's having this mixture of emotions inside of him. But if you know Peter, you know that he's a do and then think kind of a guy. So he doesn't think, he just jumps in the water. and swims to shore, which is crazy. I mean, think about that. You're in a boat. I actually argued that the boat would have been faster, but maybe they were going to take the nets. Maybe it was going to take a minute to get the fish and get the oars all going in the same direction. Peter's like, I'm not waiting for all that. I'm gone. So he just jumps in the water and he swims a football field, which for me means I'm dead, about halfway there. but Peter's a fisherman, so he must have been good at this. Now just imagine this. He's swimming. And his heart's racing for a lot of different reasons, right? He's physical exertion, but also this little bit of angst he's got inside him and excitement he's got inside him and the guilt and all that stuff, all that. His heart is just going. And he's swimming and he's swimming and he's swimming towards Jesus. Now I want to show you a verse of what they find there. It's what they all find, but this is obviously what Peter found as well. It's in John 21:9. It says this. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. What kind of fire? Charcoal. Anthrakia. That Greek word is only used 2 places in the Bible. Anthrakia, the night Peter betrayed Jesus 3 times, and right here on this beach. Anthrakia, charcoal fire, 2 times. Only places it's used. So Peter swims this whole way. And just imagine, again, he's got all these emotions and he finally makes it to shore and he's like sloshing through, shaking himself off. And I just imagine that Jesus is up here. Maybe he's tending to the fish and he's down doing the fire thing. So he's kind of got his back to Jesus or to Peter. And then Peter, he's getting closer and then it hits him. The charcoal fire, that smell, that trigger to that emotion, that trigger to that memory where he was instantly transported back just a couple of days previous where he said he didn't even know him. And immediately, I can't imagine he didn't stop dead in his tracks at the edge of that smell and have all of that guilt and all of that shame just overwhelm him in that moment. So here's my question. Why did Jesus do that? Why the charcoal fire? It wasn't because only charcoal was around. Can we just agree this is Jesus? He can do whatever he wants. If he wanted to light a fire with laser beams coming out of his eyes, he could have, right? He didn't have to use charcoal. This is not an accident. This is on purpose. Why would he do that? It's just cruel. So you have to understand, you got to see this story is so brilliant what Jesus did here. So brilliant. Jesus is recreating Peter's failure, but he also was recreating Peter's calling as well. So Peter gets this, throw your nets on the other side of the boat. And all these fish come flying into the net, and he's reminded of when Jesus called him to be a disciple, to the point that he's like, I'm swimming to shore. And the moment he gets to shore, now his failure is being reenacted as well. Because what happens is they sit down, they eat breakfast, and Jesus starts asking Peter questions. Same question 3 times. Hey, Peter, do you love me? And again, you can't, don't do that church thing. You've heard the story a million times. No, you got to feel it. You got to feel it. He's a couple days out from his greatest failure ever. That is not an easy question. He just failed him. His worst moment. Do you love me, Peter? Peter's like, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus says, good, feed my sheep. And he says, hey, Pete, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. And I feel like even that wording, Lord, you know I love you, is almost like Peter's like, you know more than I do. You know my heart more than I know it. Evidently. Because Jesus predicted he was going to fail, by the way. Jesus kind of saw it coming. Peter didn't. Jesus did. And then Jesus asked the 3rd time, Peter, do you love me? And it says that Peter was hurt by that. And he said, Lord, you know I love you. Now, why would Jesus ask him 3 times? You keeping track? Because he denied him 3 times, right? I don't know the man. Do you love me? I'll be damned if I know that man. Do you love me? I don't know him. Do you love me? Jesus is layering this together. He's piecing this whole thing together. He's reenacting his failure. And the reason Jesus does this is because I believe Jesus wanted to enter into this failure. See, a lot of times you think God wants to stay distant away from your failure. Like he wants to be like, oh yeah, you did that way over there, okay. But no, Jesus wants to get all up in there. He wanted to enter into this failure. And here's the thing that he had to teach Peter that we have to get. And I feel like this is one of those things, even if you've been a Christian for decades, it's one of the things that we know here, but sometimes we forget here. Peter thought that his identity was achieved. But Jesus is teaching him here that his identity is received, that Jesus is going to give him his identity. He doesn't have to earn his identity. And that is massively important to your life, for you to realize that your identity, especially if you are a follower of Jesus, it is not something you achieved. It is something you have received. God doesn't work like that. Peter's framework was, I failed, that means I'm not that. And Jesus is like, hey, hold up a minute. You are that. I know you failed, died for it, now grow into it. Did you hear me, Christian? Because that's the way this is supposed to work. You're not supposed to go, I failed, that must mean I'm not that. Nope. Jesus is like, no, you are that. I have bestowed that upon you, knew you were gonna fail, died for that, grow into it. Grow into it. That's the way God works. So let me talk to you for a minute. If you are a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, this is something you might struggle with. I would say one of the ways you can know you struggle with this is if your spiritual life has really severe ups and downs. And I'm not talking about little ebbs and flows. Everybody has ups and downs a little bit. I'm talking about extremes, where you're close to God and then you're gone, just gone. You know that? Some of you are like, I am back for the first time right now. I know exactly what that is right now. Yeah. That's because you do this thing where you screw up and you think God's mad at you and you think you have to go and make some good decisions and I'll read my Bible for a while and I'll pray for a while and then I'll come back to God all sheepish. Hey God, it's me again. And God will be like, hey, happy you beat yourself up, you can come back in. But that's not the way Christianity's supposed to work. Jesus didn't die on the cross for you to go beat yourself up for a while every time you fail and wait weeks or months to come back to him after that. Jesus died so that the moment you fail, you run to him, not away from him. He wants you to sprint towards him. And here's where it gets even deeper inside of us as Christians. Lord, help me explain this well. So in the Bible, we as Christians are called to some pretty lofty things, wouldn't you say? If you've ever read it and you read the stuff that's supposed to be true about Christians, there's some crazy stuff in there, right? Like we're supposed to love our enemies, not love the people who love us. We're supposed to love our enemies. That's crazy. We're supposed to forgive even the worst of things, and it's not just that we're supposed to forgive, we're supposed to be forgivers, right? We're supposed to be loving. We're supposed to share our faith. Like you're supposed to be somebody, if you're a Christian, it's supposed to just kind of bubble out of you sometimes, like you can't even help it. That's what you're supposed to be. We're supposed to give a portion of our money back to God to honor him. We're supposed to be generous. That's supposed to be a mark of a Christian, that we're generous. That's supposed to be who we are. We're supposed to be careful with our words. We're not just supposed to pop off. We're supposed to control our anger. Stuff like that. And that's just a small list. There's a huge list of things that describes who we're supposed to be. Now let's be honest. You, Christian, fail at every single one. Every single one. You've never done any of them perfect. Not at all, right? But here's what we do, especially in this day and age, the way our culture works now. You'll run into a piece of what God wants for you. So the Bible says, hey, you're forgiven, so now you're a forgiver. And you'll run into a really difficult thing that you don't want to forgive, and you'll try to forgive, and you'll fail, and then you'll immediately back away from it and go, that part's not me, because of your failure. Or the Bible will call you to share your faith, and you'll try it once, and you'll sound like an idiot, right? Or it'll be super awkward, and you won't have some warm fuzzy. You'll feel like you did something wrong, you said something wrong, like maybe actually this person's gonna go to hell because of what I said, and I don't even know, I don't know what I just did. And what you're gonna do then, if you have this my identity is achieved thing, is you're gonna say, I guess that's not me. And you take pieces of this Christian walk, and because you fail at some of the pieces, you say a sentence like, that's not who I am. And I'm telling you, that is the opposite of the way God works. God wants to say to you, hey, this is who you are. I know you're gonna fail. Actually, you're probably gonna be terrible at all of it at first. Of course you are. Because God's vision for your life is bigger than you. You're not gonna be an A+ student at any of it out the gate. You're going to be a beginner. You're going to be a learner. You're going to fail again and again and again. That doesn't mean that's not who you are. That just means you need to grow into it. And you have infinite grace to grow into it. He is a Father who loves you no matter how many times you fall. He loves you, he loves you, he loves you, he loves you. And from that place, a place where your identity is not achieved, it's received, that is a massive place of strength. I can fail 1,000,000 times and I'm still this. And he still loves me and he still wants to use me on this planet. I'm invincible. You can't stop me then, because I'm just gonna keep going. I'm not gonna be Peter. I'm not gonna say, I failed, I guess I'll go back to this now. God's like, nope, that's not the way I work. Flip it upside down. You are this. You're going to fail. I died for it. Grow into it. Grow into it. All right. Real quick, I want to talk to you if you're not a Christian yet. So maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you're not a Christian yet. Maybe you're not a follower of Jesus. Maybe you're here because you're curious. You have some questions. Maybe you're seeking. Maybe you're here because somebody twisted your arm or promised you lunch after. I hope you go somewhere good. But I have you for this moment, so if I may. Maybe one of the reasons you look at following Jesus from a distance is because you look at your life and maybe there's some things that you've done in your past, or maybe you're currently doing, and you look at what Christianity is, and you look at what following Jesus means, and you think, well, I don't do that, so I can't be that. And the mentality would be that you think, in order to follow Jesus, I have to clean myself up and then I can start following Jesus. So it's this clean yourself up part that's got you stuck, that you're like, I can't go towards him because I have to clean up. And either maybe you don't feel like you can, or maybe some parts of it, if you're really honest, you don't even want to. And you think that like disqualifies you. But I want to say that's the opposite of what the gospel says. Jesus says, follow me and then I will clean you up. Follow me and you will be a fisher of men. It doesn't say, figure out this fishing for men part and then you can follow me. No. The follow part came first. The surrender of your life came first. The saying, I need something, God. I need something in my life. I can't do this on my own. You surrender, walk with him, and he cleans you up as you go. Don't get this reversed. Don't let some mistake in your past or some habit that you have be the thing that prevents you from coming to God. It is the very reason he came. Jesus came and died on that cross for that thing. That is the reason he came. So if you have a little voice in your head saying, there's no way you could be a Christian, you do this. No. You do that. That's why he came. He came to die for that. He wants you to follow him. He loves you so much right where you are. Right where you are. Nothing that you do or are doing prevents you from coming to him. Nothing. You can lay it down at his feet. and he will go to work on it. So here's what I want to, oh shoot. I got to read one more thing. It's too good not to. I'm sorry. So years later, Peter's writing. Peter wrote a couple of books of the Bible. This is years after his calling, then failure, then restoration here. 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10. He says, but you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as a people, now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, now you have received God's mercy. You can't tell me that as Peter's writing this, he's not remembering that charcoal fire where he's like, hey, I had it wrong. I thought that I had to earn my identity. I thought I had to achieve my identity, but Jesus showed me that actually he chose me. He chose me. I'm his possession. Me failing doesn't change God's possession. He owns me. I'm his. Once I had no identity, now I have one because he gave it to me, and I live from that now. So here's how I want to end. I would ask that you close your eyes right now. And I just want to give you a minute. Maybe it's been a minute since you've said, hello, God. So say hi. Maybe you haven't. Maybe it's been a busy day, a busy week, a busy month, a busy year. Say hello. It's me. Now I want you to imagine entering the throne room of God. And I mean, just imagine how crazy that would be to walk in this monstrous throne room and have a throne sitting up there, too big to even see the top of it. And I want you to approach, but I don't want you to come empty-handed. I want you to bring your failures. That one that always pops into your mind when you hear the word failure. Or that thing that you keep doing that is a failure and a failure and a failure and a failure. I want you to bring it up. Maybe you can bring it in a book bag. Maybe you need a wheelbarrow. Maybe you're going to back a dump truck into the God's throne room, and I want you to dump this out at the foot of the throne. And now you're tempted to feel guilt and shame from this failure that here you have brought into his throne room. But man, now I want you to imagine Jesus getting up and saying, whoa, 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 whoa. I died for all that. That's paid for. That's done. Actually, give me your guilt. Give me your shame. You're not allowed to have that anymore. I took that on the cross onto myself. Jesus is asking you to not just give your failure, but to give your shame and your guilt as well. He took it all. He took it all. He took it all. Give it to him. You are not more spiritual because you feel guilty. You are not more spiritual because you feel shame. That is a lie. The most spiritual thing you can feel is free in the presence of Almighty God because of what Jesus did for you. Your head will go up for that. Give him your shame. Give him your guilt. Give him your failures. Jesus, I thank you so much for this story. I thank you for directing Peter like this, Lord. I thank you for recreating Peter's failure. Lord, I pray for the person right now who they feel like a failure. That's what they brought in here today. Lord, I pray that your presence would be heavy in their hearts, that they would know right now in this moment that you bestow upon them a different identity, chosen, loved, full of purpose. I pray for the person who maybe hasn't yet decided to follow you, Lord. I mean, there might be 100 reasons why that is. I pray that you would make yourself real to them today. And I don't know how you're going to do that, but I pray that you would invade their life. And I pray that no failure or guilt or shame would prevent them from walking towards you right now, Lord. That they would pray to you right now in a prayer of surrender, a prayer of God, I need you, a prayer of I give you my life right now. Lord, I pray that this church would be a safe place for failures, that we would know our duty is to remind each other of who we are, loved and chosen and forgiven, and that would be something that we just do over and over and over and over again. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.